Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's event, hosted by the Clean Energy Business Network and Environmental Defense Fund, Investing in Innovation Federal Programs from the Inflation Reduction Act and Beyond. I'm Lynn Abramson, President of the Clean Energy Business Network, and I invite you all to introduce yourselves in the chat. So let us know who you are and where you're zooming in from today. A few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar and we'll distribute that to all registrants tomorrow morning. We are also sharing a slide deck, so you can find that in the chat. We'll put that in right now. And we will also be sharing that in the follow-up email tomorrow. So this has all of the information from today's event, plus some additional detail and links on the programs we'll be discussing. Please be sure to save a copy of that for future reference. And then finally, please use the chat to send us any questions that you have for our audience or for our staff. So if we can please go to the agenda. Terrific. So we're going to start the conversation with a brief introduction of your hosts, and then an overview of federal energy innovation programs and where to find resources. And finally, our expert panel discussion. So first, let's talk about the Clean Energy Business Network. Our organization is the small business voice for the clean energy economy, offering policy support, market and technology education, and business development assistance. Our nationwide network spans more than 7,000 small business and community leaders nationwide across a broad spectrum of technologies and services. We'll learn more about Environmental Defense Fund from Nicole Buell, Director of Federal Climate Innovation. Nicole, I don't know if we lost you there.
No, sorry, I hadn't been granted. Can you see me now? I think I've
Yes,
been granted privileges to speak. So wonderful. Thanks so much, Lynn. I'm Nicole Buell. I'm a Senior Director for U.S. Climate Implementation at the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm focused on coordinating our activities across the organization as they relate to implementation of both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, with the goal of helping to make sure that both pieces of legislation are making the positive impact that they're intended to do. A little bit about the Environmental Defense Fund. We're a global environmental organization working in more than 30 countries around the world, and we utilize our expertise in science and economics, along with a commitment towards climate justice, to deliver solutions that stabilize the climate, strengthen the ability of people and nature to thrive, and support people's health. We really appreciate this opportunity to work with the Clean Energy Business Network to bring you this webinar today, and really look forward to the conversation ahead.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole. And now we're launching a brief audience poll to get a better understanding of your priorities. And we'll have another poll at the end to get feedback on the content we present today. So while you hear a little bit more of the introductions, we ask you to please take a moment to complete these. Now I'd like to welcome my colleague, Andy Barnes, Clean Energy Business Network's Director of Policy and Communications, to give an overview of federal energy innovation programs.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you again to everyone for tuning in today. I'll be providing a brief overview of federal energy innovation programs to set the scene ahead of our panel discussion. The first major piece of legislation we wanted to highlight is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This bill was signed into law nearly 2 years ago in November 2021. The package included $80 billion in investment for clean energy, efficiency, and transportation. As you can see, this included major investments in EV charging and energy efficiency programs. The next major package, and marquee one at that, is the Inflation Reduction Act. So the IRA was signed into law 1 year ago tomorrow. And the IRA is the single largest investment in climate and clean energy in American history, with $370 billion for these programs. It also advances the Biden administration's goal of directing 40% of benefits to disadvantaged communities through the Justice 40 initiative. Diving a little deeper into the IRA, much of the investments in clean energy flow through the tax code with expansions and extensions of tax credits for renewables, efficiency, and EVs. Importantly, the IRA also provides long-term business certainty with a technology-neutral tax credit framework that goes from 2025 through at least 2032. So this is crucial for innovators looking to commercialize several years down the road. There are also several bonuses that incentivize labor standards, domestic manufacturing, and deployment in disadvantaged and energy transition communities. Additionally, the IRA created the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which serves as a national green bank to direct $27 billion to advance clean energy deployment across the country with an emphasis on disadvantaged communities. IRA has led to a boom in clean tech deployment and manufacturing. The American Clean Power Association has just reported that since IRA passed, $271 billion in utility scale clean energy projects have been announced. This is equivalent to 8 times annual investments over years prior. So the IRA has also unleashed clean energy manufacturing with 83 new utility scale clean energy manufacturing plants, which have generated nearly 30,000 good paying jobs and counting. So the IRA has truly led to a renaissance in clean energy manufacturing. To illustrate this point, our friends at American Clean Power compared manufacturing capacity pre and post IRA across batteries and components in the solar industry. And as you can see, we're seeing major jumps across the board. Shifting to existing federal programs for clean tech innovation, if we could advance to the next slide, please. So this chart from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations is a helpful map for where different offices fit on the commercialization timeline, from the earliest stages on the far left to the most mature stage on the far right. So left to right, these stages are research, development, demonstration, and deployment, also known as RDD&D. And we'll quickly cover a few of these programs from early stage to later stage deployment, and you'll be hearing from 3 of them on our panel. So starting with the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs, the SBIR and STTR programs are the largest source of early stage R&D funding for small businesses. They enable small businesses to explore their technological potential and provide the incentive to profit from commercialization. Moving slightly to the right on our timeline, we have the Advanced Research Projects Agency Energy. ARPA-E advances high potential, high impact energy technologies that are too early for private sector investment by focusing on transformational energy projects that can be meaningfully advanced with a small amount of funding. Shifting even further to the right on our commercialization timeline, the mission of the Office of Technology Transitions, or OTT, is to expand the public impact of the department's RDD&D portfolio to advance the economic, energy, and national security interests of the nation. OTT is the front door to the Department of Energy's products, facilities, and expertise. The office integrates market pull into its planning to ensure the greatest return on investment from DOE's RDD&D activities to the taxpayer. Shifting even further to the right on our timeline, we have the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, or OCED. OCED manages over $25 billion for large-scale clean energy demonstration projects in close collaboration with the private sector, all in an effort to accelerate deployment and market adoption. While OCED primarily works with larger firms, there may be opportunities for subcontracts with those firms. In addition, OCED may soon be rolling out a program that supports smaller scale demonstration projects. On the furthest right edge of our timeline, we have the Loan Programs Office, or LPO. LPO, which received a major boost from IRA, manages $400 billion in loan authority for large-scale, innovative energy and advanced automotive manufacturing projects. Finally, we wanted to highlight the American-Made Challenges program. It covers both ends of the commercialization spectrum. The American-Made Challenges support innovation through a series of prizes that offer funding, training, teaming, and mentoring. It's supported by a whole network of ecosystem support organizations, which the CEBN is proud to be a part of. Finally, we understand we're throwing a lot of information out there, but we wanted to give you the opportunity to dive deeper into programs that are most relevant to you and your activities. So just a reminder, we are circulating the slide deck to all registrants. And the next several slides I'm going to cover link to resources you may find useful. So I'll just run through these very quickly, and keep in mind you'll be able to access these links afterwards. So this slide includes ways to stay engaged with federal offices featured on our panel, in addition to CEBN and EDF. Of note, CEBN operates a clean tech funding database, which aggregates funding resources for early stage clean tech companies. And then EDF has also produced resources for businesses to navigate IRA programs, including their activation guides and an IRA tracker. I also wanted to preview some resources available from one of our panelists, Sedale Turbovsky. So his company, OpenGrants, works to improve the efficiency and equity of public grant funding. And you'll be hearing from him shortly. Next slide, please. And finally, we do have a list of several federal websites that you may want to consider registering for now in order to avoid delays when you apply for grants. So that covers our overview of federal innovation programs and some helpful resources you may want to dive a little deeper into. With that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Nicole Buell, who serves as Director of Federal Climate Innovation at EDF. Over to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Andy. I am delighted to introduce our collection of speakers today. First up, we have Dr. Marina Sofos, who's the Program Director at ARPA-E at Department of Energy. Victor Kane, Deputy Director for Commercialization Programs at the Office of Technology Transitions at the Department of Energy. Eric Byington, he's the American-Made Network Lead of the American-Made Program as part of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and Sedale Turbovsky, who is the CEO of OpenGrants. Do our panelists, are they teed up? Got one. Hello. Hi, folks. I can frame our first question. So I know that Bill and Ira are what have brought us together today, but I know that our audience members are interested in federal funding opportunities broadly. And thank you to everyone who's filled out the opening poll. I can see that over 50% would rate their sort of knowledge of Department of Energy programs in particular at moderate or less. So this is a really great opportunity for us to kind of learn some big picture information about these programs. So that's where I'd like to start. So I would ask to the panelists, would each of you be able to speak to how startups can engage in the funding opportunities, how they can learn if they're a good fit, and what are the typical funding cycle and amounts? Dr. Sofos, can I start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Nicole. So a pleasure to join this webinar. The best way to engage with us is to be signed up on our mailing list. And that way, as soon as a funding opportunity is released, you'll find out, just like everyone else. We're unable to speak to whether or not there will be a future funding opportunity until it's actually out of fairness to all of our potential applicants. And similarly, once a funding opportunity goes live, we enter a quiet period. And we do that because we want to be fair and to give everyone an equal footing when they're applying to our funding opportunities. Now, there are two types of funding opportunities at ARPA-E. The first are our focus programs. ARPA-E has a pretty broad mandate, and as was mentioned, we're going after very high risk, high impact areas, looking for the white spaces where they're currently unexplored. And if you think of technology development in terms of waterfalls, of improving performance and decreasing cost, at ARPA-E, what we try to do is essentially kind of bend that curve or the current learning paradigm and create a new one, kind of go for kind of the unexplored areas that can really disrupt a particular technology or paradigm of thinking. And so as a result of that, our focus programs are driven by program directors such as myself based on our interests. My area is predominantly in the built environment, for example. And so if you are in a particular technology space, the next way to really engage with us is go through the directory of program directors. We all list our research interests in areas that we're exploring, and send out an email to that program director to find out more about what they might be interested in. When there is the potential of a program or a program director is looking at a particular area seriously, we will put out either a request for information or have a workshop, and we post all of that as well on our website. So that's why it's really important to be on that mailing list to find out more if your interests align. The other type of funding opportunity are our open solicitations, meaning that they're open to all technology areas. And this gives us the opportunity to look at kind of unexplored areas we haven't thought about, and also bring new potential applicants into the pool. Historically, every 3 years, we've had a big solicitation called Open. The last one was in 2021. This is open to all types of applicant entities. We also have used a vehicle for smaller dollar amount awards. These are in the $500,000 amounts that used to be called Seed. Most recently was called Create. We just announced selections on those about a month ago. And we're always looking at new ways to reinvigorate that funding vehicle. By doing it at a lower dollar amount, we can make those awards as rather than cooperative agreement as fixed cost grants, which allows us to move a little more quickly in the selection, negotiation, and award process.
Thanks so much. Who would like to go next? Victor, can I call on you?
Yep, sure. So Maria covered a lot of it, so I'll try and cover some things that she didn't cover. But best way to engage is to sign up for the newsletters and mailing lists. Every funding opportunity we issue goes out that way. Also following DOE and OTT on LinkedIn and other offices on LinkedIn. That's another place where you'll constantly see these things going out. And if you're a startup, it looked like most of the groups for startups in that poll. There is kind of a pipeline of, let's say, how easy it is to work with us. So one, if you've never worked with DOE before, I'd definitely check out prizes because those are issued as just checks. There's no specific systems that are required or auditing or invoicing. So that's the American Made Challenges. American Made Network has all of the prizes that DOE is issuing. So Eric will probably go over all of that. And those that participate in the prizes tend to find a natural landing place in the SBA, the Small Business Innovative Research Program. There's another one. Their solicitation goes out twice a year. And then that's when you want to look at your specific technology office that might be applicable to what you're working on. So if you work in, let's say, geothermal technologies, there's a geothermal office. So you would definitely want to be paying attention to that for their large financial assistance efforts. And then the ones applicable for OTT you might not be looking at yet, there's a partnership intermediary agreement that we just kicked off at DOE. This is a new type of authority. You can go to EnergyWorks, WERX.org. And so we just stood this up, and there's some excitement around that. So there might be some new programming going through there that you wouldn't otherwise see. And the main reason to set up the PIA is to start engaging and working with entities who DOE traditionally does not work with. So if you haven't worked with DOE before, that would be a great place to pay attention to. And the last thing I'll say is, it may sound maybe a little dull, but there can be a lot of interesting information in the appropriations process as it goes through every year. There are things that have a major impact on the types of programs we run. So if, for example, we're in a continuing resolution, we're not allowed to do things called new starts. So we can only issue programs we've run in the past. So that is very indicative. And also, if we're delayed on the budget process, it holds up when we announce our program. So you might see programs coming out much later in the year. So there's ways to tell when a lot of activity would be coming up. And that's where working with groups like Sedale and others who are familiar with this might shed some light on that. So you can go to the American Made Network, which has hundreds, I'll say, I think it's over 200 entities that are there just to help small businesses succeed and access DOE funding. So you can look on the map and see where local groups are around you. So I'll stop there, but happy to answer any questions later.
Thanks, Victor. Eric, may I turn to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And Victor, thanks for kind of teeing up everything that we're doing with the American Made Challenges here. So my name is Eric Byington. I worked with the American Made Challenges, and I head up the American Made Network, part of what we're doing within the Challenges program. The work that we do is I work for National Renewable Energy Labs, NREL, and we are kind of the partner to the DOE on administering these prizes that Victor was talking about earlier. We like to say they're some of the easiest dollars that you can access when it comes to the funding mechanisms right now that are available. And part of what Victor was saying earlier, there's not a whole lot of accounting or strings attached on the back end of this. It's really meant to be fast funding, get you some momentum behind what you're doing. And then the network side of it is there to kind of support the work as it moves forward with prize competitors, both as they're going through the competitions, but then as they're coming out to the other side of that and looking to find partners, product market fit, continued kind of research and development around what they're doing within their product. And we also have we kind of break our network down into two categories. We have our power connectors, which CEBN is a great and proud member of. And then we have kind of our connector network. And we're up to about 400 people, 400 organizations that are part of that network that are there to support the work of the prize competitors. Part of the work I'm leading now is how we're really focusing on getting a little bit more focused in both industry, region, and looking at how we can get a little bit more specific around some of the issues and topics that come up around some of the challenges that prize competitors are faced with. But we, to date, the prizes have been in motion for about 5 years in this sort of iteration. We've distributed it around $200 million, and there's a lot more funding kind of coming in through those prizes currently. We have about 63 prizes that we're administering at the moment. If you go to AmericanMadeChallenges.org and go to our challenges section, you can go in and see all of the current competitions that are open, ones that are sort of in motion, and then you can look historically and go back and see what we've done in the past. The prizes are all different. And I think the best way to kind of get engaged with the prizes is to check out that AmericanMadeChallenges.org page. Go in and click on a prize that might be applicable to an area or an industry that you're interested in. And you really have to kind of dive into a little bit of the description and some of the legal, the structure of the prize to understand exactly what they're looking for. But they vary in size, they vary in scope. We've awarded anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 checks up to 7-figure checks. There's multiple stages for some of the prizes, and people kind of go through a down selection process as they're moving through that. So each one has its own sort of look, feel, and flavor to it, but there are new prizes coming out all the time. And like everybody else has said here, I think signing up for the newsletter on the front page of the AmericanMadeChallenges.org site. It's down towards the bottom there. Is a great way to kind of stay informed about what's coming out. And like I said, we've got new prizes being announced and started all the time. But if there is something that catches your attention, clicking into the tile of that prize on our website, we use a platform called HeroX, and you can actually follow that prize on the HeroX platform. But it's a great way to stay in touch and kind of track the progress of what's happening. And then one other thing I'll just mention real quick is there are multiple types of organizations or individuals that can benefit from our prizes. So we typically have focused on kind of earlier stage startup type organizations, but as the prizes have evolved, we funded incubators and accelerator programs. We're looking at some prizes that are doing work in the economic development space. There have been prizes that are open to nonprofit organizations. So there's a variety of organizations and types of people that will work with across all prizes. So I encourage you to dive into that site and take a look around and see if there might be something that would fit.
Thanks, Eric. And Sedale, if I can turn to you, you're situated well to have sort of a broad view of federal funding opportunities. Are there any others that we haven't spoken about yet that you'd like to highlight for the audience today?
Yeah, I think just a couple in terms of both supporting access. So there's a few that I think folks may have mentioned lightly. For example, within every state, there's additional like SBIR. Well, not every state. There's frequently SBIR matching programs, and also, the government, the federal government, has done a great job of funding a variety of technical assistance providers in these ecosystems, and you can find those resources on websites like SBIR.gov or at OpenGrants. So I just encourage founders, as you're listening to all of this and thinking about like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of work and a lot of different newsletters to track down. There's some great ecosystems where they'll be offering you resources that are not necessarily capital, but they are consulting and technical assistance. And those include, the PTACs, the SBDCs. There's technical assistance folks who have been awarded grants specifically to help you with SBIR and other programs and navigating the federal government ecosystem. So those are spread about in different places, and they tend to be very specific to the program you're applying to. So just encourage folks to reach out and look at those specifically. And then there's the other thing that wasn't mentioned here, what I think is a huge opportunity for startups in general, is the larger programs like the DOE loan program, but also programs like Solar for All and others that are ongoing right now really involve multiple partners applying. So you'll have city or local government or coalitions that are applying and looking for these bigger federal dollar grants. And it doesn't seem like a natural fit, but they are certainly looking for technology providers and other groups to come in and provide very specific services. So as you continue to engage with this ecosystem, just highly suggest you also connect with the folks around you and look at maybe what your local government or your representatives are doing to bring federal dollars to your community. And you can frequently participate in those kinds of opportunities.
Thanks, Sedale. A follow-on to this conversation is for folks who maybe haven't applied for these funding opportunities or aren't as familiar with these programs, some sort of context and examples might be useful to understand how they might fit in. And so I was curious if each of you might be able to speak to some of the awards that your programs have made in the past 6 to 12 months. Eric, may I turn to you to provide some examples if you're able?
Sure. Yeah, so, we were started under the Solar Energy Transformation Office. And so our solar prize has been our longest standing prize so far. We just had a solar prize round 7 launch. And I think it provides a great example of kind of an ongoing prize that has continued to evolve over time. There were just a handful of checks that were awarded a few weeks ago. And these, the people that have won the solar prize historically have been working on everything from sort of micro solar energy sort of projects all the way up to looking at how we're scaling solar utilities across, widespread utility companies and into homes at a more mass scale. So there's a whole myriad of organizations that have been awarded prizes through our solar prize competitions. The solar prize is one of the bigger prizes out there. So some of the checks that are awarded through the solar prizes, reaching into the 7-figure mark as we move to the later phases. But we've got direct air capture organizations, or direct air capture prize that's just recently been launched. We've got an EPIC prize, which is focused on working with accelerator and incubator programs that are working with clean tech companies. And so we've been funding those entrepreneurial support organizations that are really there to work with the clean energy revolution. We've got a Heliostat prize that's out there right now, that there's again a whole myriad of opportunities. And I think anybody that's working in the clean energy space right now can probably find some sort of prize, either that is currently open or has historically been there, or is potentially in the works. That is, there's going to be some sort of opportunity out there for them at the moment.
Thanks, Eric. Victor and Marina, any examples of awards in the last sort of year of types of companies or projects? Marina, I see you off mute.
Sure. Yeah, we, as I mentioned, we just announced selections recently on a funding opportunity we had called Create, which was designed as these up to $500,000 fixed cost grants open to any type of entity, including startups as well as universities and others. And that one was, particularly open to all technologies that fit within ARPA-E's mission. So we had a number of startups that were funded through that vehicle. We also just announced selections on an exploratory topic that is focused on new modeling opportunities to unify and kind of optimize freight rail transit. And so in that case, we used kind of similarly to create these exploratory topics are kind of smaller dollar amount funding opportunities intended to explore spaces that are kind of seeding potential full focused programs in the future.
Thanks, Marina. I want to sort of shift us, as Andy introduced, there's a lot of new funding vehicles influencing federal opportunities, like things from Bill and IRA. There's also administrative priorities like Justice 40 and manufacturing. And so I'm curious, what are some of the new priority areas that are influencing opportunities in your offices? Victor, may I turn to you first?
Yeah, so one of the newer things that are going on in OTT's office is, well, it's not new. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 started this thing called the Technology Commercialization Fund, where each office in DOE, each applied energy office, provided 0.9% of their funds into a pool that would go towards helping commercialize promising energy technologies. And that's morphed and changed over the years. But with the passage of Bill, it turns out that Bill is applicable to that law. And so there is roughly $250 million that is applicable to that needs to be programmed over the next 5 years. And so OTT is responsible for the TCF program. And so we've stood up a whole new team to design, and develop these new programs in collaboration with all the offices that are involved in the relevant bill provisions. There are several new things that have come out. There's this voucher program. There's 5 different areas. That's in the partnership intermediate agreement area that I was talking about that EnergyWorks is running. And this is an opportunity for small businesses to receive not funding, but access to unique resources that the government can provide, and that private partners the government can provide to help them be successful. So I encourage people to look at those voucher opportunities as an example. And then there's a manufacturing program called Make It, where we're trying to think about how we can encourage and incentivize new manufacturing facilities across the United States, and how we can work with local communities to make that happen. And then, on the other side, we have our energy program for innovation clusters, which has been running for several rounds now. But, place-based groups and entities that can work locally and nationally to help accomplish the DOE mission and reach people that DOE can't actually reach is a really important priority. So that's a program we hope to continue and hopefully, that would be something that we'll be able to announce in the near future. So if I did see a question in the chat about, can nonprofits receive awards from DOE? And the answer is yes. The energy program for innovation cluster is a great option there. So maybe I'll stop there. See if I have any follow-ups.
Thanks, Victor. Any of our other panelists like to talk about new areas of focus? Nope, we can move on. I know that we'll be moving to audience questions shortly, so but I did want to sort of take advantage of the expertise on the panel and would love to kind of get your sense of what are some of the challenges that you've observed startups experience in accessing federal funding, and what advice do you have to help startups succeed in their applications? Sedale, can I turn to you first for this one?
I mean, this is my fourth venture-backed company, so I am currently in and have been in that founder position a multitude of times. I think that one of the biggest challenges is just founders don't have a ton of bandwidth to do the diligence that is required to respond in a very competitive way to these programs. And so we see frequently on the consulting side, have seen incredible applications getting disqualified for just a lack of awareness of like the full kind of breadth of the requirements. And so it's one of those opportunities that, easily cured by working with someone who has some experience. And there's a great, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of incredible technical assistance programs and opportunities out there. So I just really encourage, founders to take advantage of, there's a multitude of free or quasi-free or almost free resources out there to help you navigate these programs that can be, a huge opportunity, but also tend to be a bit dense. And so, yeah, really encourage, founders to take advantage of that. And the other thing is, these are really great, like long-term relationships. And so as founders, definitely be thinking of, these funding partners as partners and not some sort of like weird adversary that you want to like hide things from or not collaborate with. One of these awards can, snowball into a lot of really cool opportunities, and you can build some really powerful relationships here. So, I do appreciate all the work that these agencies do. And we've seen some incredible companies go from, seed to exiting, leveraging capital from the DOE and other agencies. So it's definitely an incredible pathway to be on, especially if you're developing really disruptive technology in this space.
Victor?
If I could just build on that, one common misconception I've seen, especially with startups, is they think they need to actually meet the person that has developed a funding program, similar to like what you might see with a VC or something. They'll see a funding program they are very well aligned to, and then really try and get a meeting or meet with someone. And that is just like the opposite of how government funding works, where once, and Marina hit on this, once a funding program goes live and is public, we can't talk to anyone. And so I think people get discouraged when they're shot down. No, we can't meet, blah, blah, blah. And they don't think they have a chance. And so they don't proceed, but it's actually the opposite. We want to make sure we can be as fair as possible and don't have to recuse ourselves in the review. And so just shut down communication with the public if we're directly involved in that solicitation. So it is a little counterintuitive in that sense, but what we do is we work really hard developing these solicitation documents. They seem like just legalese, like terms and conditions, maybe you would just click through and say whatever, but there's really important details, as Sedale pointed, that can make you ineligible if you don't do a certain thing. And so reading those instructions and imagining the human being that wrote those instructions on the other side and giving them what they need to try and help you receive that funding is really important. So those are two main takeaways.
Thanks, Marina.
Yeah, I think these are all excellent points, and kind of to expand on that as well, I would say, reading through what the the technical content is of a particular funding opportunity is really critical as well. We put a lot of time and thought into what the asks are. And for that reason, really checking to make sure that there's good alignment with what you want to do as a startup to what the actual funding call is asking for, because sometimes there's, a desire to apply to as many things as possible. And if there isn't good alignment, it could, easily, you have limited resources, as Sedale mentioned, and it could lead to kind of losing focus on what your, core kind of mission and what you're trying to accomplish. And so if there isn't good alignment, then, that's okay. Don't try to kind of force it and then end up, taking on more than you can handle, and maybe like redirecting things in a way that don't align with what you ultimately want to accomplish as a company.
Thanks, Marina. Eric, do you have
Maybe
anything?
one
Like
last thing. The last thing I'd say is just being ready to apply when it opens. So it's sort of a weird setup where it's open for 30 or 60 days and that's it. Like if you miss that window, that opportunity may never come around again. It could be like a one-time program. We're trying to develop more programs that are recurring, but I think just paying attention and recognizing kind of between, I'll say, January and April, a lot of funding programs come out because that's just the way the funding cycle works. So especially being attuned then, they can come out at any time, but really paying attention, I would say February, March, about what's coming out and being ready to dive on an opportunity could be to a lot of people's advantage.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is just from the perspective of the challenges and the prizes that we're awarding. Like Victor was saying, there's some limitations to, or there's some, quiet periods that are required on the government side of things, but that's part of why we've set up this network. It's part of what the power connectors are there for. We've seen the most successful companies that are coming through the challenges and applying for the prizes. The most successful ones are the ones that have really leaned into the support of the network and the power connectors that's on offer there. I think, as Victor said, like coming in, well, everybody sort of touched on, be prepared for what is being announced and read through the documents. But then from a prize and competition standpoint, I think really leaning into the expertise of our power connector community and some of our connectors. They're there to help. They're there to kind of guide. They're there to provide feedback. I've heard multiple stories of successful organizations that felt like they weren't going to make it over the line or make it to the next phase, and leaning into some support from organizations to say, hey, here's how you could frame this. You do have some good traction behind what you're doing. Here's the way to kind of take that next step, has led to them winning, every stage of the prize. So I think really utilizing what we're creating through the network and through the power connector group is really important on the prize and competition side from the American Made Challenges standpoint.
Thank you. I see a lot of bubbles popping up in the chat, so I want to make sure that we have time for audience questions. So Lynn, happy to pass it to you, and I will add my additional questions into the chat as well. So thank you to the panelists.
Yeah, so just realized I am invisible there. So one of the questions we've gotten, and I think Eric and Victor talked about this a little bit, but maybe you could add a little bit more detail on any grants or sources of assistance for nonprofits. So there are quite a few at DOE. There's also some at EPA, and I could speak further on those, but can we kick that off?
Yeah, I think the one quick thing I would say is that we do have some of the prizes that have come through that are open to nonprofits. It's not across the board. So I think my one piece of advice there is just take a look at the AmericanMadeChallenges.org/challenges page, read through the challenge or the prize that you think you might compete for, and see if it's open to nonprofits, because there are some that can be awarded, but it's not true across the board.
Yeah, and I would say there's more coming out. It's sort of ramping up, at least currently. Like with the Make It strategies track that's trying to work with communities. I saw a question here about disadvantaged communities. There's a lot of interest in organizations that can help reach those communities and help them benefit from some of the opportunities coming out of DOE. And so I think if you're an organization that can do that, you're well positioned to receive some funding. And the other piece is the partnership intermediary agreement I mentioned. Also, it's meant to reach people, especially the Spanish community. So there again, while it's just getting stood up, I think paying attention over the next 6 months there should be some opportunity as well.
Yeah, great. And I would say, I know of the programs you mentioned, so you mentioned the Make It Prize, which is currently open, but some of these community-oriented prizes that we've had in the past, such as the Inclusive Energy Innovation Prize, the Community Clean Energy Coalition Prize, those are certainly geared towards nonprofits or entrepreneur support organizations. And I would also say, we mentioned at the beginning, Andy in the slides talked a little bit about the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is that National Green Bank program. And a lot of the funding that's coming out of that is geared specifically towards nonprofits that can help stand up energy deployment or innovation programs in their communities. And the one I would say that is the most accessible probably at this point is the Solar for All, which is is looking to make several dozen awards. Some of the other programs are looking to make just a handful of very large awards to programs that would be administered nationwide. So Marina, it looked like you were about to say something.
The only other thing I was going to add is that, oftentimes our awardees aren't a singular entity, so there'll be a prime recipient and then there will be subcontractors or subrecipients. And so there are also opportunities to team across different types of entities, depending on what the funding opportunity is. And at least at ARPA-E, we typically put out what's called a teaming list in the form of a request for information when there's a chance that a funding opportunity might be coming out. Again, no guarantee, but basically what that teaming list is you agreeing to posting your information on the ARPA-E exchange website, which is the repository for all of our funding opportunities. And then you have access and can see, every other entity that is also interested in applying to this potential funding opportunity, what their capabilities are, what your capabilities are. And then you could actually reach out to that other entity and start talking and saying, okay, well, there's potentially this funding opportunity. I think our interests are well aligned, or I have a gap and you have the capability that would fill that gap. Let's potentially kind of put together a joint proposal. And so I just wanted to add that in because, that's another mechanism for maybe, a nonprofit to come in or vice versa as a prime or a sub.
Yes, and actually since you just raised that topic, one of the questions that we wanted to make sure we addressed, and we talked about this a little bit, but for some of the larger programs, so Andy mentioned, for example, OSED, LPO, when they are putting out these grants or loan guarantees for $150 million projects, the typical startup isn't going to be the prime recipient on some of those. But can all of you discuss a little bit some strategies for how startups might be able to take advantage of those types of opportunities as subcontractors, as research partners, or other ways to navigate those programs?
Sure, I can jump in. I think, this applies to all of these programs in general, and really just goes to the point of being ready to apply for these things. If you're a founder and you're working in this space, just show up and be part of the community and figure out, you should know what projects are going on and where you can deploy your technology. And ultimately, the teaming lists are really great. They're also sometimes a bit hard to find, frankly. And it's also hard to just be engaged at the right level in all of those individual teaming lists. But, in many of these projects, you'll find local governments, consortia, other groups, tribal nations, they're looking for your support. And if you have a list of projects that are going on, or places where you should be deploying your technology, you can, insert yourself into those processes. I saw someone in the notes was like, oh, the Solar for All deadline passed. Well, that was just a letter of intent. There's applications that are ongoing. And if you happen to be ready to deploy some technology into one of those ecosystems, you could show up now and participate and be a sub-awardee for those programs. So a lot of this is just doing the work of networking, knowing your industry, knowing your space, and participating. If you think this stuff's just going to come to you, or you're going to roll in and just apply, that's, it doesn't always work out that way. And especially for these big awards, you're just not going to compete. But if you want to be part of these teams that are applying, and like I know DOE just did their direct air capture, one of the TA providers on our platform, I think they rolled in 4 different startups into I believe the award that was slated for Louisiana or somewhere. That kind of relationship that comes from participating in your industry and being a part of the process. So, there's not a shortcut for it, but you have to show up, do the work, network, and you can hire consultants to help you with that. But a lot of that's just hard work, like pound the pavement, meet people, be top of mind when people are putting these applications together.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And on that theme of accessibility, in addition to the startups, what are some of your suggestions for how to best bring disadvantaged communities to the table to benefit from the energy transition and the funding resources? So I know, Eric, some of the American-made prizes are particularly geared towards that, but as we mentioned earlier, the Justice 40 initiative isn't an administration-wide priority. So what are all of your agencies doing to try to reach disadvantaged communities?
I think we're actively working to try and improve there. It's tough. DOE, it's just, I can only speak for DOE, but it's really hard to do public engagement in a completely open and fair way. So that's sort of the umbrella of how we have to do everything. Is everybody has to have the same access. So we do our announcements, we do LinkedIn posts, and it's more passive. It's sort of, here it is, it's out. But we can't say, oh, I met that person at a conference once, and now that this is public, I'm gonna forward that opportunity to them, because then all of a sudden, if they apply and win, it looks unfair. So I think we rely a lot on external organizations. We definitely need help with that. So, for example, in the prize arena, we use the Power Connector approach, which is how we first met Clean Energy Business Network, and they've reached groups like you. For some reason, you heard about this webinar, but maybe not one that DOE is issuing, and that speaks to the fact that that's effective. And then the other piece, like I mentioned, the PIA is a major high-level initiative to try and come up with a better way to engage with new entities. So that's just kicking off at DOE, but it came about because of this specific challenge of reaching disadvantaged communities. So I do expect some opportunities to do better work there.
The one thing I would say is we are, I think, in the middle of learning process right now. So we just held an event a couple of weeks ago on NREL's campus called the Minority Women in Business Entrepreneur Listening Group, and it was essentially trying to understand how we can do a better job of disseminating this information. Like Victor said, we sit in a little bit of an interesting spot where we have to, make sure that we are not showing priority favor to any one party in a lot of ways. But the key for us, and one of the key takeaways from that experience, was how are we building more and more community champions? One of the big pieces of feedback we heard was there's a lot of information that gets tossed out there, but how do we make sure it ends up in the right hands? And we have used the network and the Power Connector network to lead that, but it's something that we're going to continue to really build upon. And that is really looking at, and just to give you an example, what we heard from sort of a rural context was there's a lot of people in like rural utility groups or rural communities that are interested or working on projects that could benefit from these prizes, but they don't have the time to sift through the information that's being delivered to them. So how can we create the partnerships with the groups that can be that relayer of the information, be the champion of that information? So that's something from the network perspective that I'm working on that is really important to kind of our next step in how we're continuing to open up these opportunities. And as we're building that, we will be looking for people to contribute and be a part of that building of the kind of the champion network and the dissemination of that information. So we're all ears, and we're open to working with anyone who's interested in helping us continue to push forward with that work that we're leading.
No, that's great. And we really appreciate that. One question I noted in the chat that I will save you from, Eric, because it is asking about specific funding, which is, will there be additional rounds of something similar to Inclusive Energy Innovation Prize? And I will just save you by saying as a power connector that, you know, we have seen so many more of these community-oriented prizes. So I think there's just a lot of interest in this type of work. So stay tuned on that front. We only have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to pick a few more questions. One is, so this is interesting. Can you just talk a little bit about, so obviously, you know, for those of you in the Department of Energy, you're influenced by the political priorities of the current administration or legislation that's been passed by the current and previous Congress. What are ways that we can sort of depoliticize or ensure the longevity of some of the programs that you're working
on? I think, you know, just developing good programming that's impactful across the nation. So it helps all. You know, one example that came up was the solar prize. I was actually in the solar office when that started in 2018. And it was about solar manufacturing and helping, trying to come up with ways to help with that. And so the prize, I think, does have some great successes, and it carried through and continues now. So where you can accomplish things that really help a lot of people, it tends to span that gap. But when you're hyper focused on a program that is very narrow, then sometimes it doesn't stretch through multiple administrations. So it's an interesting area to work, but we do the best we can to get out of it.
Great. And Sedale?
Well, I just wanted to quickly throw out there, there's some very cool nonpartisan kind of efforts, places like the Community Infrastructure Center, the Milken Institute, and several others are running, where they're standing up these networks to support, continue to scale things like TA and project development, continue to support these underserved communities or rural communities and accessing programs. So there's just also like communities of practice that are being built around these programs that do contribute to the longevity and just utility of these things outside of administration changes and so on.
Terrific. I will note we're about to launch our exit poll where we want to get a little bit more information on what was useful to you today and the level of detail so that this can help guide future events. We do frequently have events unpacking some of these federal programs. So now that you're on our mailing list, make sure that you sign up for those. A couple of quick questions that we can just kind of pick out of the chat. And then I think there was a very good closing question for all of you. Kind of some questions about grants that don't require US citizenship. I could just say quickly, and the speakers can add any further color to this. Some of the grants don't necessarily require citizenship. A lot of them do require current residency, legal residency, or that it be a US-based business. And I would say you just really need to look at each specific grant's requirements. But a lot of these, resources aren't meant for US-based investments. There was a question about wind distributed generation. There have been some, SBIR certainly addresses that. ARPA-E, Marina, is there anything you would say on that front? Components?
So we've had prior programs in that space, and again, we try to look across energy technologies, so we're constantly exploring new unexplored areas.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, and we've seen that in some of the university prizes as well. There's like the collegiate wind competition. So I think those are a couple of the quick questions. We will be following up again with the slide deck and more resources, but one quick question, I guess, just as we close, is there anything additional the panelists would like to say in terms of things that really keep you excited for the future as you look at the programs you administer?
I can go. So I've been at DOE for 13 years. So it's like I can right at the end, right at the beginning of the Obama administration. So sort of spanned across that. And the changes at DOE from just that time have been incredible. I mean, it's been a really interesting way of seeing the industry where, you know, I started in the solar office and saw that take off. And now in this last few years with the passage of 4 relevant laws that fundamentally changed and reorganized the Department of Energy, and watching it all play out, and how that can, now things are starting to hit from those laws that passed, and seeing how having good people in the department really matters and impacts what we do with the funding that is made available to us to give to others. So that's what keeps me hopeful. It's a growing importance and a limited number of people here at DOE. So we need all the help we can get, but ultimately it's one of the biggest investments in clean energy in the world. So helping DOE be successful, I think, can matter. So that's how I stay hopeful.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate that note, closing on that note of optimism and hope. You know, and if we didn't have a chance to answer your question, you can all feel free to email us. Again, we will be circulating the recording and the slides tomorrow with more information. Just quick round of applause, and thank you so much to our panelists for sharing this wealth of expertise with us. And thank you as well to EDF for partnering with us on this event. Have a great afternoon, everybody.